My name is Christian Landström. I try to give you an overview of our experiences, and especially my experiences doing network forensics for the past years. The reason I did this talk is actually pretty simple, maybe a little disappointing to you, because I've attended lots and lots and lots of talks about network forensics and incident response and all this stuff. Because when I started with that years ago, I was searching for kind of a best practice sheet on how to do this. So there must be some default procedures which you can always follow. So when you have no idea what you're tackling or what you're dealing with, there must be some basic rules, some guidelines which are always correct and which will always at least give you a basic path to follow if you're encountering a project where you, in terms of forensics, we have basically no idea what you're starting with in most cases at the start. And after having seen lots of talks and lots of tutorials and whatever, I figured that it can't be true. There is no red line to follow. There is no real, always true best practice approach, and I thought it can't be hard, so let me just figure one. I started doing so and ended up a few weeks later saying, damn, there is no one. There is not the one real approach. And that kind of frustrated me, so I thought, okay, there must be something you can still do. And what I figured is, in the whole area, depending on whether you're doing this the first time or the 10th time or the number 1000 time, your behavior will change. The way you approach projects will change. And in addition to that, so independent of your knowledge and your experience, every incident has some similarities, but on the other hand, there's so much unknown variables in there that even depending on the project, there may be several approaches which will give you either a good choice or a bad choice. So coming back to the main reason for this talk, I want to try to give you an overview in about 70 minutes on various different approaches which may or may not successfully bring you to the point to tackle projects. I can't guarantee that this will always be true for you, so please don't estimate me to give you the red line to follow, because I failed giving myself this red line. And every project, again, brings me to the point where I say, okay, there are some common things which you can always do, but then there's a lot of it depends. So as with classic packet analysis, when you ask some of the devs or some of the core developers and some of us packet analysts, is there something I can always do when reading trace files? You will also, most of the time, get a few answers, and after that, it depends. It depends on the type of project, on the specific whereabouts of what's going on there. So basically, this is not necessarily the order in which these topics come, but I try to give you a very short overview of current security infrastructures. Why do I do that? The reason is pretty simple. We have some expectations to networks we approach when doing either penetration tests, vulnerability assessments, or going for an incident response job, or coming just for plain forensics. So we suspect some things to be there in terms of security architecture, in terms of security appliances, in terms of configurations, what customers should have today. And we rely on some things just being there, which enables us to do certain stuff, to use certain techniques. So this is why this is kind of important. So even if I did tell you a minute ago, I have not the strategy for network defense and for forensics. I'll try to give you a short insight of the starting steps. So things you may want to do just for a start, to see how it works out, to see how much information you can gather from that. I have a lot of trace files brought with me. Those trace files will be pretty easy to follow, I hope. So who has ever done network forensics? Please raise your hands. So give me an overview. Okay, that's quite a few. Okay, good. For the rest of you, don't be afraid. It will be, I hope, quite easy to follow, because I'm not going into the most crazy items in the trace file. What you can see today, I try to put the examples in a way that it's pretty easy readable, so you get an idea of the concept, what's behind that, on what to look for. So since this is a Wireshark conference, I also decided to focus this barely on Wireshark. There's loads of other tools, and I'm totally honest, they may be the better choice when doing network forensics. So also, when I do something with Wireshark, you might raise your hand and perfectly say, hey, I have a tool which is way better suited for that. Might be true, I agree. But given this conference, I show you how to do it with Wireshark, because most people should know Wireshark by today. And from that on, you can also adapt these techniques, of course, in tools maybe well better suited for a specific purpose. No? Okay, so Speaking of the toolbox, or what companies should have, or what we encounter before we get into a job and before we say, okay, we get some network trace files and we search for stuff which may or may not be in there. We assume nowadays that most of the companies do not route their internet traffic plainly through their gateway to the internet anymore. So we suspect most of the companies, and even many home users up to today, to have some kind of centralized internet access gateway, typically a proxy server, who does some authentication, authenticates the user, visits the web page for the user, checks the content against some antivirus software or whatever, and when this is done, delivers back the answer. So who has a proxy server in his company? Do you have to use that proxy, or can you go bypass the proxy server? You don't know, or you don't think so? That's one of the already big questions. Is it really impossible to circumvent the proxy server? Are there some whitelistings somewhere for specific systems which may be that old that they are not aware of a proxy? Maybe you have some 15-year-old specific appliances, especially in the industrial area, where you brought a machine, it can access something on the internet, but it just didn't bring the configuration for a proxy back when this was bought. So there may or may not be some special devices or some special users which don't have to use the proxy, right? So what's the big advantage when you use a proxy server? You try to specify a single point or a single path where all the information going to the web pages will exit your perimeter and where the answers will go back in. And that's the key strength of having that, because then with logging and monitoring, you have to only focus, hopefully, on one or a few proxy systems, so you know where your traffic has to go through, right? When you don't have that, you start thinking about, okay, how many internet outbreaks do we have? Do we have some backup lines? Do we have some 3G, 4G, whatever uplinks, just in case there's something happening, whatever sorts of possible things. And when you try to monitor what's going on, you completely lose control. So that's a big advantage of doing so. And technically speaking, once you have the data path established, so to speak, you have all those classic security stuff in there. You have your packet filters, your firewalls. When you're talking about DMZ and your hosting stuff, you probably have gone for web application firewalls or some other devices like that. Years ago, you remember that started with you have to have intrusion detection. And somehow that switched to you have to have intrusion prevention. Okay, so some kind of difference. And you have this NITs and NIPs and HITs and HIPs, so host-based, network-based intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, whatever sorts of. And this is kind of old. I don't tell you have to have that, but this is, from the sales approach, what you've heard the last 10 years. You got to have this box. Now you got to have this box. Now what about your client? He should also have a firewall and a HIPs and whatever. And the newest trend, I'm pretty sure you have known that, is all this magic stuff, which is out there for 3, 4, 5 years now. All those sandbox appliances, which will put everything you downloaded in some magic box, make something out of it, and throw alerts if it's malicious. Who is using that already? Who has some type of sandbox or anti-APT device? Okay, that's not a lot. Who knows them but doesn't use them? Heard of them? Oh, great, better. Why? Too expensive or? Not thought about it? Still configuring IPS? Maybe? So this whole layer is, as of today, the thing that we see in companies. I'm pretty sure if I would redo this talk in 2 years, we might have another line, because then something brand new, shiny is there, and companies go to and say, yeah, you should have had all those stuff, but now there's something way better, right? So this keeps on evolving and evolving and evolving, and that's basically what we assume that you have in some way. So the basic idea is always pretty simple. Everything which hits your parameter, hits your first packet filter or the second packet filter or whatever. So this is just very high level, very abstract. But no matter what you use, if you use like packet filtering, IDS, IPS, whatever, the idea is just to get as many threads as possible away from your data path before they hit the server or the end user. So no matter what technology you use, it may be better or not that good, but the concept kind of much is the same. So what do we have as a key expectation? We expect every packet filter to really filter out everything you don't want to have in your parameter. Who has ever done an analysis, classic network analysis, behind your firewall, really checking are the rule sets configured correctly? Do we really only see packets which we expect there? Anyone? This is a definite recommendation. If you have some time to waste or some fun to spend, do so. Talk to your firewall admins, check the rule sets, put a packet filter, packet sniffer in there, and just check what does the rule set do. You'll be amazed how many rules you have which are not exactly doing what you may expect, and you still get stuff in. So, but we assume it's working perfectly. So we just see packets coming in and just have packets going out where we exactly know what they are because we want them to be there. We don't want them to get filtered. So then we have this defense layer kind of sort, IDS, IPS, or you might have a firewall with an intrusion prevention module, so it doesn't really depend if it's two boxes, one box to do everything possible. So like the next feature set. So from the traffic you want to have, because you defined your rule set, and by defining the rules, I said, hey, I want to see those packets. I allow them to go through my packet filter. You want to check if there's some nasty stuff in there. So you're searching for exploits, you're searching for whatever known sort of bad things to happen, so bad packets in any way. Not bad in terms of performance, but bad in terms of security. So you want to see someone is attacking or trying to steal your data or whatever. And we assume, okay, you have that, this is running fine. Again, a good thing to do, put a sniffer in front of your IDS, IPS and see what is this thing doing. What does it alert and what packets do you see coming out of the IDS where it's not a single alert? No? Again, is a pretty interesting thing. So when the packet filter got all that stuff away which you don't want to have, and everything got inspected, and everything is green lighted, everything is fine, there's no malicious behavior in there, you go to the next point where you say, okay, maybe if there's something being downloaded, like a binary or like a driver, we might not be really sure if that's really doing just what we suppose it to do. So maybe you want to check inside some virtual sandbox, virtualized system, whatever, if there may be malicious activity associated with this executable program. And by that, you already see you don't really fully trust your IDS, IPS, because it's not there to filter out everything malicious. It can't do that. So this is yet another layer of defense for dynamic analysis. Most systems also do static analysis, static code analysis, and give you some pinpoints. And depending on the type of sandbox you have, or depending on the type of anti-IPT feature you are having, there's various techniques with those used. Some emulate the whole thing and take a look at what's going to happen. Some just let it run in a hypervised environment and watch the hypervisor when he has to provide memory and do some calls, so all those ring 0, ring 3 changes. Some hook the system, hook the virtualized system to see what API calls are getting called. So independent of how this is being done, this stage should again give you a red flag when they say, hey, there is a binary, it runs, it does something rather malicious. So how do they know that? Again, there's static stuff involved. Of course, also the sandboxes have some static items when they see that the binary does that, they treat this rather as pretty malicious. So the question is, when you have a piece of software which tries to connect various systems on the internet, is this malicious or not? Well, it depends, and this is what those systems are trying to figure out. So is it just a check for update like Wireshark does when you start it? It will connect to the internet. Or is it something which calls back to the CNC server, trying to get commands, trying to do malicious stuff on your system? So by some benchmarks and by some metrics, those systems just give it a rating and decide how malicious is it. And depending on the rating, they give you an alert or they don't give you an alert, right? So from the sales point of view, after that, there should be everything green, everything fine, no exploits, no APT stuff, no malicious software, not whatever. So technically speaking, this is kind of everything you can do, of course, with add-ons, et cetera, et cetera. The problem most companies have is they rely on this. So they buy all this expensive stuff, they put it in the network, and they say, well, we did everything we could do. So we have a strong defense chain, a strong automated defense chain. And while this is perfectly true, there may still be the piece of software which does not detect it, does not get blocked, does not throw an alert. So what do you do to spot those things? Because technically, of course, you can always keep on adding an appliance back to back to back and prolong that defense chain. But at some point, you have to just switch tactics. So this is your automated technical stuff. And for the rest, which is not being flagged as malicious, you have to have other things, other techniques, other people maybe, to check this, right? So even if you consider the host itself as the last line of defense, so to speak, defending itself from being exploited, being installed, to prevent malicious software being installed with local rules, a local intrusion prevention system, which is the very last line, also local antivirus, of course, at some point this chain ends, and that basically is the point. So coming back to the forensics approach, for me it's rather completely different story depending on what I'm supposed to do. So one of the questions is, do I suspect that there is something? So does a customer approach me by saying, hey, we have a problem. Can you please come and help us out, figure what's going on? That's, let's say, category A. But most customers come like saying, hey, can you check if we have something malicious going on? So we're not sure. We're having some servers go mad. We're having some blue screens. We're having crazy behavior. We have things we can't explain. We check the logs, we have no idea what it is. We fear it might be something malicious. And if you've been to Jasper's talk, we had the fun this year to have like 4 terabytes with, is there something malicious in there? Go check it. This is, yeah. No need to say this is, it's insane, right? This is a huge area when you don't know what you're looking for. So category A, there is something. You know there is something. You just have to find it. This is rather easy. And if you have never done this, I suggest you start with this ones, because that's just, you have to spot the malicious thing because you know it's somewhere in there. It's like the needle in the haystack. You may have this haystack, using Jasper's terms, but there is a needle. Category B is you have an even bigger haystack and you don't know if there's a needle in there. So when you search through all the things and you didn't find anything, you're still not sure if you just overlooked it or if it's really clean. Nasty, but also something you have to do. To make it even worse, I try to differentiate between regular malware, whatever type of malware you have, like this mass infection things, which want to go for your credit card, make your turn your host into a zombie machine for doing distributed denial of service attacks, steal credentials from eBay, from Amazon, from whatever. So regular stuff going to target as many victims as possible to make quick money. On the other hand, this shiny term APTs, or targeted attacks, right? So there's nothing, no one going for, hey, let's infect 100,000 users, but someone going, I want to infect 2 guys. Your sysadmin, maybe your CEO, I don't know. So very precise, very targeted, specific malware for your company written to attack 1 or 2 people behaving totally different. And whatever you suppose to be there, or what you know to be there, there's again a big differentiation, so maybe category C and D. Is it targeted? Is it not targeted? Do we know it's there? Do we not know it's there? So all these combinations are kind of possible. And of course, the easiest one is you have something, regular malware infection, so someone calls, yeah, we have a ransomware, we have a locky, we have whatever. We know it's there. It's pretty simple. We just don't know how to handle that. This is kind of easy because you know what you're approaching. You may not know the specific malware type, but you have a pretty good idea of what those things are doing because, of course, they want to make money. So there's something they will do on the system. They will try to communicate. They will connect back to the internet in a pretty static way, a pretty simple way. They want to be online as fast as possible as soon as you fire up your workstation. So this is nice. And the worst case scenario is you don't know what's happening, but let's say one day you open up your local newspaper and you find critical data from your company being somewhere on Pastebin or in Google Docs or whatever. And everyone's like, what the hell is going on? How did this get out? You have no idea. So it might be that you have something sitting in your network for over a month, over a year, over 5 years, which is constantly monitoring what you're doing. And this is not something you want to have there. So you are infected by whatever malware, which is targeted, which is silent, which does not lock your screens, which does not encrypt your hard drives, which does not steal your credit card numbers because it doesn't care. It just wants to read your emails and be as internal as possible to see what's the company doing. And when this comes out and you don't know what machines are infected, this is the kind of the worst case scenario, right? And everything between, of course, is possible. So for the sake of easiness, I leave out inside jobs in this talk because there's yet another category. I just put this on here because many companies come to us, and one typical question we get, to make it a bit easier, Jasper, me in 2013, we were tasked of doing a penetration test on a firewall. We said, nothing we do that often because it doesn't really make sense to pen test a firewall because I try to attack the users, not the firewalls. Firewalls are pretty safe, usually. And we asked them in the kickoff meeting, why do you want us to do that? Yeah, well, in Asia, we have a productive environment, and we took 10 years of R&D budget, like 15 million euros of R&D budget or even more, to build something there which is kind of best in class, best in the world. So our top engineers were working 10 years on that, and we have a competitor in wherever, and in 15 months, they were able to build up something pretty similar. And their conclusion was they must have breached our firewall and have stolen all those critical information. And one of the first questions I asked, so it took 10 years. How many people were involved in the project? There was like, maybe 800 over the whole 10 years. So how many of them, from 10 years ago till today, are still with you in the company? And then they said, well, that's a good question. We actually don't know. I said, it doesn't matter. Give me a rough figure. I'll try to ballpark. They're like, maybe we have a fluctuation of 100, 150 people. So I asked them, are you sure? Not a single of these 150 guys is talking to a competitor? I said, might happen. We're not sure. We still think it's a firewall. I said, okay, what about the 650 guys still there? Did they have any virus infection on their multiple workstations in the last 10 years? Sure, some of them must have, statistically speaking, 10 years, 600 guys, sure. Well, did you check every single infection if there was something stealing data, sending it out? We're not that sure. What about those 650 guys? Do you check them every evening when they leave the company parameter if they have data on their phone, if they have a USB stick, if they have a micro SD card even swallowed down or whatever? I mean, be creative. Yeah? If I put a briefcase with loads of money on your table and say, hey, could you just bring me some documents? For some people, it just depends on the price. So I was personally pretty sure that there's not this classic thing going on, someone hacked the firewall like in bad Hollywood movies. It might be way more simple because there's so many other possibilities what I would have done if I would be the bad guy. So I told the customer, hey, I have so many options to get this data which I want to have. I don't need to hack a firewall because this is one of the hardest things to do and one of the most expensive things to do and one of the loudest things to do. So it can be done pretty easy. So, but since this is 70 minutes and not 4 days, I leave this area completely out. I just have this here to remind you, keep this in your head. Because in lots and lots of projects, you will get sidetracked by people who only think of technical attacks, who don't have the social component in their head, and you have to just value that against. Also, when you put up security chains, there's no need in wasting 50 million bucks on security hardware when your people can do whatever they want and when they have access to all the data they want to have, and when you have like 10,000 employees. So just try to keep this balanced. Okay. So coming to the actual analysis, so whatever there is going on, you may have a malware, you may have an APT, you may have whatever. At some point, you get a network trace and you start looking for stuff. What do you look for? Let's say you have no idea what's going on, you just sift through whatever there's in the trace file. Any default idea? That's what I was talking with, there is no red line, right? No. You just take a look at what you have in the trace. So there are protocols, there are IPs, there are ports. And for those protocols, you should be able to perfectly describe what you expect those protocols to do. So here's a very, very basic example. You have FTP. And you see the size column in there, and you see there's a 1,000 byte FTP request going out. Does FTP do that? Do they have that long requests? Who's for yes? Who's for no? Yes, they can. Sorry. The thing is, you see behind this request, that's a user request. So this is how we authenticate to an FTP server. And if you have a username and password for your FTP server or one of your FTP servers, who of you has a 500, 600, 700 character long username? There you go, that's the thing. So that's why this is strange. Not because it's just big, might happen. There might be FTP commands which just carry lots and lots and lots of data, right? I might upload a file which has that long of a file name. I might create a directory structure which has something big, right? But the combination of we expect a username and it's a pretty long packet, that in itself is kind of strange. And now that you have it here on the screen, you can see that 5FFY80 something, that's also not a typical username. But of course, you don't see that when you just scroll through the trace, or maybe not on first look, whatsoever. But this is just one out of a million examples of what I like to call protocol anomalies. So you have a certain network protocol, you basically know what it should do, and there's something which is strange. It's just strange. And this is the only thing where I can tell you, this you can really adapt on every area of network protocol. When you know what it's supposed to be doing, just ask your own mind, do I think this makes sense? Does it look valid? Or is it just strange? So to give you bad news again, you will encounter lots of strange protocol behaviors because you have creative people working in your company who use protocols for whatever purpose, but not what were they originally designed for. You have strange coded applications. You have strange appliances. So you will run into lots and lots and lots of items which are totally weird, which do look malicious, but turn out to be, well, not normal, but valid, legit. The good thing is you learn from those, because you will see them again in your specific network environment. And you kind of have your own whitelist. Okay, I've seen that. I know this is, again, a nasty printer or whatever, misbehaving, right? So for your local network, after doing this a few times, you know your typical things, which you will see, which don't look valid, but you can ignore them pretty quick. When you go to a new infrastructure, everything is down to the base again. And you have to start all over because there may be totally other stuff what you see, right? And this is the thing. So when you try to graphically do this, still with the FTP sample, that's how you might try to spot if there's something in there by just monitoring certain request sizes or whatever, and when something just peeks out. This might be strange. And very simply speaking, very on a high level, this is kind of how all those security systems, of course, also work when they do like behavioral analysis, if you prefer the term. So they have a certain baseline, they have certain thresholds, they expect stuff to look like this. And when it does totally misbehave, they might warn you and say, hey, we saw something which is kind of weird, you better check that. So that's basically out of your tens of thousands of intrusion detection system rules. Many of them just work that way. Of course, way more complex in the implementation, but to explain how they work, this is kind of how you do that. So when you know you have something malicious going on, it might be pretty quick because you sift through the trace packets and you spot all the anomalies, you investigate them, and one of them, for a pretty high chance, must be your malicious activity. You just need to spot it because it's somewhere in there. Like said, when you're not sure if there's something, when you're checking that if there is something, you might end up with having 20 weird things, all perfectly valid, and you're maybe not really sure if they are all valid, but you say, looks pretty good. I think this is not an infection, it's just some weird crap, and we have to keep going, right? So I'm sure many of you have seen Jasper's Haystack talk, where he talked about knowledge versus experience, right? So again, bad news here. The more knowledge you have about the protocols, the better you can gain experience while doing forensics. Kind of the same here. Although this is not performance analysis, this is completely different. When you can do performance analysis on a very high level, you need to have protocol knowledge. You know how protocols behave, because otherwise you won't be able to troubleshoot. Which is why, when you can do that, it's kind of easy to adapt those knowledge to do forensics, because you know what you should see in a network. And when you see something misbehaving on a network, you can pretty quick figure out what it is. Is it by design? Is it by malicious activity? You can pretty easily spot that, and then of course you have to check, you have to gather more information, talk to people, talk to the users, talk to the workstation admins, to the server admins, to be able to evaluate, is this just weird or is it malicious? If you don't know how the systems are configured, if you don't know how the application behaves, you don't know the protocols, don't be mad at me, but don't even start. You will never finish. It's impossible. That's where you should use automated tool sets, external intelligence, external technology. That's where you buy money for. So if you're not, if you don't feel fit to do that, that's a good point to call someone who has some shiny big database of malicious activity markers or whatever, because that's usually faster than you just 2 weeks spotting trace files and not sure what you're looking at. I don't want to be rude in that point, but this is really something where I recommend try to play with it, try to get better, but don't put too much work on yourself if you're not confident enough that you can at least manage to do some stuff, if you don't know the basics or if your knowledge is not on a certain level. When you have all those events, and you have the trace data, maybe you have some log lines, you should have log lines, there comes a point which I like to call the correlation phase. So you see some network packets, you have a pretty good idea what's going on network level, and you want to check with other system log files, why did that happen? So for example, you have a workstation which is accessing a web page and which is just doing whatever. If it's downloading stuff, uploading stuff, I don't care. I just want to know, did the user do that? So I could ask him. Usually he doesn't remember what he did 2 days ago. Or I can try to check log files. So do I have a proxy log entry where I see, okay, this user authenticated validly against me, and then the proxy went to the internet, fetched the web page, gave it back to the user. And what's the benefit of that? You get, if your log systems are configured correctly, you get more information. Because when you take your local machine, do you have a fixed desk at work where you go to every day? No, but do you have a fixed space where you sit? So you move around in the company, first floor, second floor. Okay, who has a fixed working space? Okay, I take you guys as an example. So usually, you come there in the morning or in the afternoon, you fire up your machine or you wake it up from sleep. So you're pretty static where you are. So you should be pretty static in terms of your IP address association, what the HTTP server gives you the IP address, in which VLAN you are. So this is kind of static information as long as you don't move around too much. So with this additional information, one typical example is you check the proxy log, where did the client come from? So I know it was Mr. John Doe accessing an evil web page. I see that. I see that also in the trace because I see here there's the proxy going out saying, hey, for Mr. John Doe, I need to get evil whatever. The question is, where did John Doe sit? And was it John Doe itself, or was it some machine using John Doe's credentials? So if this came from a totally different IP address, let's say John Doe is working from Canada, and we have a proxy log saying, yes, someone from Spain authenticated as John Doe on the Spanish proxy going to the internet while John Doe was physically in Canada. We know there's another situation, right? So we know it was not John Doe sitting in Canada doing that, or maybe he RDP'd into some system in Spain. We don't know, but we know this is fishy. You know, there's something maybe bad going on, something definitely strange. And this is just an example of how to correlate all this stuff. So you want to have your network information, what you know definitely what happened from seeing it in the trace. You know this fact. You have it in the PCAP. It did happen. And together with all the other information, you just try to build a picture. What happened in a higher layer? Who did what, when, where? Was it really that guy? Did someone steal credentials? What was going on? No? Another typical example is when you spot stuff which you are pretty sure it's malicious. Let's say your IDS gives you a hint saying, hey, I saw a packet to your web server, looked like an exploit. So you go into the dump file, which you hopefully have, and you check this out and you say, yeah, well, I see some strange code going to the web server. Yeah, definitely it looks like an exploit. But you say, yeah, I think it's patched. This looks like an old vulnerability. Web server is totally up to date, so it should be good. So how can you try to make sure that it really is good, that there's nothing happening? What can you check? Well, the most easy thing is to just take a look at what's the server doing after we saw that try to exploit it. So let's say the web server talks to a database 5 minutes later. Is it good or is it bad? It depends. If the web server usually does talk to the database, where we are in knowledge, know your systems, know your app behavior. So if it's serving a web page which is gathering information from a database, it might be normal. If you have a web application just delivering static content, or where the server is rendering all the stuff by its own, and he did never talk to that database in the last 2 years, but now he does, I personally would give a second look to that unsuccessful exploit and see, this is strange, right? I don't expect the system to do that. And of course, you can never be sure, because if I would attack you, I could implement like, yeah, wait for a week, yeah? Infect the machine, go on vacation, come back, and then try to do malicious stuff when no one is still looking at what's going on. But most systems, most malware doesn't have that long time. So at some point, they want to get active, so they will start to do stuff. And when you perfectly know what the system is usually doing, it's kind of comparing just usual against unusual behavior. Do you know this spot the difference pictures? In some magazines where you have 2 pictures and they tell you it's 5 differences, find them. So it's kind of comparable to those pictures, because if you take 2 pictures of the Sahara Desert and say, find the 5 missing sandcorns, this is pretty hard. And this is default behavior even where we work for many people, because you have hardly a chance to know every single piece of infrastructure, every single piece of application. But I just want to encourage you, start with it and start with the critical systems where your most critical data is being put on, where your authentication servers are and so on. And if you're lucky, let me check if I have that. If you're lucky, it can be as easy as that if you exactly know what you're looking for, right? So if it's completely easy, and you've done this 10 times, you take 1 peek and say, yeah, spot it. That's easy. Yeah, there are other examples, but yeah. Okay. Of course, this is idiotic, but just to give you a feeling of how you should or how you could approach this stuff. So I can promise you, when you've seen stuff like 10 times, 15 times, you spot it with 1 eye. So if you get waking up in the middle of the night, trace file in front of your head to see, there it is. I've seen that lots of times. You'll recognize. Okay. So another few examples, quick examples for protocol anomalies. So what TCP port do we have here on the server side? Where's the SYN going through? It's port 80. So what do we expect to be running there? Regular web server. So we have the handshake, and in blue, we have the first data packet coming from the client to the supposed to be web server. And easy question, is this what we expect in a web server connection? Or is there something strange about it? And if, what's strange? Once again, louder. Yeah, you have the handshake, and then you see the client sending whatever type of request to the web server. Because why do we visit the web server? We want something from it. So we either want to post data or get data, or whatever. But this is just data. Yeah, there's a push bit in there. OK, it's 58 bytes. Easy as that. So normally there should be a get statement telling you to do this. Let me quickly open the trace, and we'll have a look at that. Like I said, this is totally plain basic, but you can adapt this to every other protocol. So let's filter for that one. And here we are. This is the push. And you check inside here, you don't see a GET request. You don't see any readable ASCII command, so this is not even maybe misconfiguration. Wireshark is just strange. And when you take a look at another packet here, you see there's even more stuff we don't know. And then there's data coming back from the server. And here we have something. And when you try to just read that, like I said, this is a very basic example. This is not something you will see today very often. But this is like classic. You have some control connection to a system, and in the end, if you're lucky and the malware is not that clever and it doesn't encrypt, it doesn't encode all the commands being sent back and forth, this is kind of telnet, right? But telnet over port 80, so if you're not looking closely, you might just check, yeah, port 80, OK, or you filtered port 80 away in your analysis because I don't want to see port 80 and port 443. I'm not interested in website traffic. Bam, away it is. So you won't see it anymore, but it's there. And of course, I'm free to choose which port my malware uses. Why might I choose port 80? Maybe I know you have a packet filter on the outside, which is kind of clever, and he says, I only allow people to go out to port 80 and port 443, and some webmail and so on. So I know you want to visit web pages, so I put my command server on port 80 because I pretend to be a web page. And then other systems should detect it. So your IDS or other systems should take a look at that specific packet, what was there on the slide, and tell you right away, hey, this is an anomaly. Here's an alert, better check for that. This is what you expect from your automated systems in a task simple as that one. No? But like I said, also those can be circumvented. Oh, I don't see my slides. OK. second. So this was port 80. How about HTTPS? So we say we have port 443, usually encrypted HTTP. Might be not that simple. So we can't just follow, take a look if we can read all the stuff which is going on, because when you have HTTPS session, TLS encrypted, you just see whatever binary blobs in there in Wireshark. But can you see what's strange here? I mean, the protocol says SSL in the red area. But what's weird here? Where's Sake? Is he here? Ask Sake. You see, I double-check your talks if people were awake. What would you expect after the three-way handshake to see? Client, hello, SSL handshake, whatever, but a little more than just data, right? Might be. Of course, there are applications where you have hard-coded key pairs in there, which immediately start talking encrypted, but this is extremely rare, right? Especially when going to web server, you have, like Sake had in his talk, key exchanges, all this stuff. So there should be an SSL record. Wireshark can tell you if it's data or if it's an SSL record. And that's kind of a neat trick to say, hey, do I have any packets where the very first request right after the handshake does not contain an SSL record, because then we suppose something's missing, right? So let me quickly show you. This can be done in a pretty easy scripted way using T-Shark. Let's check with that T-Shark, whoops, caps. So is it that one? Yeah, that looks good. So, sorry. So we want to go for destination port 443 because we want to check all the packets which seem to be HTTPS traffic. And we say we want to have a TCP length greater 0. Any idea why that is? Because we want to see a data packet. So the handshake will have TCP length of 0, because there is no data in there. Or if you treat SYN and FIN as data, you have a TCP length of 1. But then you go for TCP sequence number, and you say, I want to have sequence number 1. And of course, for that to work, you have to work with relative sequence numbers. If you work with the absolute sequence numbers, you don't know the sequence numbers. So this is one of the very rare cases where I tell you, turn on relative sequence numbers. If I don't do this talk, I almost by default every time say, turn off relative sequence numbers, because it's crap for analysis, for performance analysis. Here, very useful, very handy. So let's check if that works. Do we have something in there? Where's the typo? Oh, yep. Yeah, true. And something else. So this is when you're brave and doing all the demos live. So he tells me, well, we don't have anything. There's not a single match. So if I just say, hey, give me that thing, and we check, do some more troubleshooting, why doesn't it give it to me anything? Where's my mouse? So I'm still on absolute sequence numbers. Remember, that's why I said we have to change that. So we use that thing, and we apply a preferences change, and we tell Wireshark, hey, go for TCP relative sequence numbers true. And there we go. There we have our packet. And you see exactly what we want to have. It's destination port 443. Sorry for that. That should be an arrow, but this is my German, English, mixed whatever setup, which just breaks that on the CLI. It's got sequence number 1. It's the first data packet. It has a TCP length greater than 0, but it's definitely not. Okay, we forgot the SSL record. Sorry. And so we found our packet, our first data packet. Now we say and SSL.record. So does it have an SSL record? No, we don't have packets with a valid SSL record. it does not have a valid SSL record. And of course, again, you could have false positives here, but this is something pretty easy to check if you're just going for port 443 pretenders. So you can have this script running just plainly through all your trace files and push out every single first data packet inside a TCP session where it should be an SSL record in there, but it's not. Then you clear out all your false positives, strange applications, manually coded stuff from back in the 1980s, and so on, and so on, and so on. But when there's something new, you can like immediately spot it because you know your bad applications, you know your bad appliances, and when there's a new IP pair coming up doing that, you know, I can take a look at that. So just as another example out of millions like that. Okay. So I think I end here with my basic example because I could repeat this with other examples going on and on and on and on. So you can, as a good exercise, you can take any protocol you're familiar with and try to set a display filter which describes like the valid condition and try to just abuse it, change something to make it pop out. That usually works for most of the protocols. So as already said, when you're not sure what you're tackling, this may be bad. So if you don't know if something is fishy, good luck, this is hard work. And even in our projects, one thing which really feels bad is you spend like a month on a customer side, for example, you get paid loads of money to do an investigation. And the paper you turn is, well, we looked at everything, and in all those terabytes of data, which took our sleep for the last month, we didn't find any indicator of compromise. We're very sorry, we think you're good, which is good for the customer, but we can never be sure. It might be somewhere in there where we just did not look close enough. And when someone throws 2 terabytes or 4 terabytes of network data at you, it gives you a month or 3 or 6, it doesn't matter, you can't go in deep into everything. You have to follow a certain level and stop after that. It's not possible. So you do your checks, you do the basic checks, you do the advanced checks, you have all the anomalies you find there, and you go after each and every single one of them, and you don't have a real proof that some infection has happened. All automated tools also don't give anything. Then you can only say, okay, either it's pretty damn hard to spot, so it might be really targeted, really advanced. Can always be the thing when you have like, you know, specific organizations targeting your company because they want something from you. They can be pretty stealthy. So of course it's close to impossible to find those if you don't know there's something going on. Yeah, or the company is really pretty lucky because there is nothing malicious going on. But it's always a bad feeling that you have no proof. So I kind of prefer the projects, of course, which are bad for the customer when they know they have stuff in their network which doesn't have, which mustn't be there, because then you can start hunting and you know it's in the trace. It might be 10 billion packets, but one packet has to show you what's going on, because at the end of the day, when I write a malware to infect either targeted a company or masses of people, I want to get the data which I'm about to steal. I want to control the systems which I'm about to control. I want to see the critical information that I want to get. So it has to come to me. And unfortunately, not yet, I can't tell my malware, write a letter with pen and paper and put it to the post office. So in some way, it has to electronically leave the company parameter. Might be a text message, might be an email, might be an upload to Google Docs, might be whatever. So in some protocol, there's any hint that there is something bad going on because I have to have this control. So this is why monitoring also outgoing traffic is critical. Everyone focuses on what we saw before, right? Packet filter, IDS, IPS sandbox, client, antivirus, etc., etc. So you protect your users. You try to avoid that they are getting hacked. You can't. You can't avoid users being hacked. They will always be. If you're a company of 3 people, maybe you have a better chance. But let's say you have 5,000 users, 10,000 users, you can't avoid that get infected machines. So after having all this technical stuff in place, stop focusing on that, start focusing on how do I detect if it still happens, how can I detect it, setting up monitoring, configuring my log files, getting an alert, because that's the second critical point. So you want to have good technology to prevent all you can prevent with a reasonable amount of money and reasonable amount of investment. And from that on, you want to invest your money on how do I still see if something fucks up, if something really goes broke. I kind of like to compare it to trying not to have a fire at home in the place where you live. So of course you turn off the candles before you go to bed. You don't smoke 10 cigarettes in parallel while lying in bed with eyes closed and sleeping. You don't do all this stuff because you know it can set something on fire. You turn off everything in the kitchen before you leave your house. So you try everything which is reasonable to prevent what's going on. Do you have like foam fire extinguishers in every room which will automatically flood your house when they spot a fire? No, of course not. Why? It's over the top, right? And I try to use this analogy for your network security. You don't need to have everything which is available there to prevent it because it just can still happen. So the question is, how do you detect that? So you can get this 10 bucks thing which you mount on your wall which will go beeping when there is a fire going, hey, fine enough, you realize there's a fire, okay? So that's where you switch your investment at some point, and this is what you should try to keep balanced, that this is kind of a one level. And many companies have this high technology and this capability of detecting if something still goes through. So I would know what I would attack if I were the bad guy, right? So that's basically the stuff. Oh, sorry, the picture's a little high. So it's how to spot outgoing malicious stuff, what we talked about already. So coming back to the example, so we had protocol anomalies before. We saw pretends to be port 80, should be HTTP, we don't see an HTTP request. Fine. We saw in the next example, goes on port 443, should be HTTPS, we don't see an SSL record. Fine. What do we have here? We see HTTP posts, they go out, they exactly follow the HTTP syntax. Still, this is also from Metasploit framework, some regular payload, just abusing the protocol to do that. So even if you did check for anomalies and you didn't find anything which looks strange and you didn't find anything which violates protocol, let's say, boundaries, so which is perfectly fine within the protocol itself, it of course may still be malicious. So bad news, that's the next step. So you didn't find anomalies, or all those turn out to be good and not evil, but you know there's a source of problem. Then comes your big stockpile, your really big haystack, all the valid requests. What's going on in there? That's nasty, right? Because you have valid HTTP post requests, you have valid HTTP answers coming back, and still this is a control connection. Still someone is steering this end workstation. And this can get hard. So depending on what you have and how sophisticated, let's say, this the guy that wrote the malware is, and hiding this inside protocols is not a technique which is new, so this is there for years now. So I would rather expect a good malware author to use valid protocols to hide inside the protocols by obfuscating the data inside a legitimate HTTP request or whatever. Better expect that. And so you have all these issues already, and then comes a totally new area, which I just want to briefly describe, which is internal movement. So if you remember this picture we had here, this is all the way from the big evil internet to the end user. But what happens once the end user's machine is infected? Well, it starts going to an SMB share, to the Exchange server, to an FTP server, to the intranet, to your address books, searches your local data. And what security appliances are in there between your host and your mail server? Is there a firewall in there? Is there an IPS in there? Rarely. Right? So everyone's focusing on defense from the outside. You protect your doors, you protect your windows. Whoever's already in the house, right? This is a trust zone. So most of the companies, and this is not wrong, at some point you have to build trust settings, of course, and you can't put like 150,000 IPS systems on every single cable you have. It's not possible, and it's not useful, by the way. So detecting those internal communications which you don't want to have is way harder. And since there's no technical means, or just very expensive technical means, which in most cases don't make sense, this is where you really go for do your logging systems. Log the events on your SMB shares. Who is accessing what folder, when, with what credential, from which machine. Dump that somewhere. You don't have to be monitoring that 24/7, sitting in front of that and waiting for something bad to happen, but have it, have the data. Who's accessing the emails? Who's reading all the emails from the last 3 years, from all accounts, from the mail servers? Who is trying to log on to a non-domain controller with a domain controller account? such examples. We say, hey, this is something that should not happen. You don't want a domain admin to use his really important credential of the domain administrator to log on some whatever unimportant server somewhere to just fix some stuff. You don't want to have that. So maybe you have an attacker who already stole a credential from a domain administrator. He knows, okay, I can use that to access every machine. So by this, you might spot stuff going on. Or you spot misconfiguration or bad security habits, of course. So this is again an example and definitely a recommendation. So there is when it comes most in all cases to logging. And from the forensics point of view, of course, you can put a sniffer on the workstation. If you know this one's infected, of course, I do that. I capture everything. But then the question is, on your company machine, I don't know what my company machine is doing. It's doing all kinds of weird stuff which someone in my company configured my system to do, to log into shares, to pull this, to pull that, to use those scripts and something here and something there. But again, you check with all the other logs, is this expected? Do I regularly do a connection setup to this share, to this server, etc., and you will find the connection which is not supposed to be there by default. So same stuff, other target. So I think we talked about way enough. So knowing what your applications are doing is the key. That's the only thing. I can't repeat that more than I already did. So another example of where things get nasty is when you talk about UDP traffic, for example. So I have here two traces, trace 1 and trace 2. Is it readable in the red area? It's okay, kind of. So you won't figure out by reading all the numbers what that basically is. I gave you a slight indication from making it green and red, which one is good and which one is evil. But does anyone have an idea what either the green or the red sample is actually? Do you see anything they have in common? Once again? Starting with 10. You see that in the red area? Can you see it in the back? 10 A6, 10 A6, 10 A7, 10 A0, 10 B1, 10 BF, 10 A1. What's with the green one? There's at least 2 which start with 75, and this is not long enough. So, you see that? 3rd line, 5th line, 75 something. Let's see if we have that here. So UDP packets, and we want to have data. So if I open the trace fully, you see we also have a pattern, 75, 75, 75, 75, 75, again, again, again. See that? You can't tell the answer if you don't know it. That's why I want to show you. Because again, you have 2 protocols working over UDP. Both are even having something where you can find a pattern. The one is 10 something, the one is 75 something. They're definitely not the same, because the green thing is Skype UDP traffic. Maybe not today, but it was back then when I captured this trace. The red thing is a PCOM or Stormbot or NuWar or whatever it was called back then, Russian Business Network, mass infection malware, which also communicated to lots of clients, other infected clients, using UDP. Using the overnet protocol, obfuscating that with a static XOR key, which makes all the first 4 characters always start with a 10, because the overnet protocol uses 4 bits for the request, and then IP addresses, commands, etc. So that's why there is a pattern. I don't know what Skype does, but obviously there's the 75 thing, so they look different. You don't have a chance to spot that. If you don't know that, if you have never seen that before, you can't see or you can't decide which one is malicious, which is not. Impossible. So this is why I have this on the slide, to show you that you have to put this in your mind to get used to that. To spot something, you have no idea what it is, and keep tracking until you know what it is. But once you know, you won't forget this. So next time you see that, you suppose, okay, it might be the same thing I saw already, quickly double check, done, okay, it is, put it on the whitelist. No need to do. But of course, having your big enterprise network with thousands, tens of thousands of applications and thousands of users, this is nothing you do in a month, in a week, so this is a long process. And it will always change. You will always have new protocols coming, old protocols going. So this is a constant thing to do. Where's my mouse again? Here. So a good approach for doing that, if you don't know what's going on, and again, this is just theory. You have to see if that works in your engagement. I can't promise it will work. I just can tell you this is something I would recommend to see if it brings you some additional information. Let's say you have a long list of indicators, what network activity is. So the proxy log, the DNS log, whatever. So you see what internet addresses all the workstations are visiting. And you suppose there might be something malicious in there, right? So even if you don't know and you didn't go through every single item of that millions of whatever things and you don't have an idea, it's still a good idea just to snapshot those. And I tell you why. Because at some point you start and you say, okay, this is my list. This is all the web domains visited in the last 7 days. And you put that away. 1 week later, you do the same report. Put it away. You do this every week for the last 7 days. You don't even look at that, but you have that. So one day, you think there might be an issue. Someone comes up to you and says, we might have something, we have an infection, some AV turned on, we're pretty sure it's been there for a longer time, we have no idea what's going on. Bam, classic network forensics job. You say, hey, okay. I have no idea what I'm looking for, but I have my lists. So there's 2 categories in the list. Category 1 is those items you see every week, again. The Facebooks, the Googles, the whatever, which will ever be there until end of human mankind. So they are there. I don't tell you they are not malicious. They might be, but they're there in any case. And then you have category 2, new ones. So the last 3 weeks, we didn't spot this domain, but all of a sudden, in the last 5 days, and now this guy is coming to me saying, hey, I think I have a problem with my machine. I might have done something not so clever. And within that time frame, you have a subset of that list with things which have never been there before. And I mean never, right? So for the last year, you didn't see evilwebsite.com, and now all of a sudden you have evilwebsite.com. Bam, you check that. You don't know if it's that one. And of course, this list again is like thousands and 10,000s of domains, of course, because everything's changing. But it's not the full list. And then you can separate the work. So you can have one guy or one script, check all the new stuff which comes in. Is there something we need to check? Is there something which is malicious or turns out to be on an IOC list or in a cert announcement as really being named as, watch out, this is malicious? And while doing that, you can have your category 1, which you regularly visit, and check for already existing things which are bad, but which are there for years, which you never spotted. So some old crappy malware still trying to reach a server, which is not there anymore, but you still see the DNS requests, for example. But you can do this because it doesn't really change. You have this solid list in category 1, which keep being there every week again and again and again. So you take your time, but at one day you're through that list, because this is pretty static. And the big work is not finished, but you have gone through that list at some point. And from there on, you just check the new ones, and you know what's going on there. Sounds pretty easy. I can tell you, when you have a big enterprise network, it's not that fast, but it's doable. It's one of the small things we can say, okay, this is at least an approach. You can try to find stuff in there. Okay, so no matter what you do with Wireshark, and if you use Wireshark, and how you use Wireshark, everything's fine, every technique is up to you. Like I said, I'm not going to repeat that again. You have to just recognize what the application's behavior is, see the packets, check the packets, etc., etc., etc. Long-term comparison of network traces also something I can just recommend. Like Eric said in his talk, he's keeping his own private data for how long? A year or something?
As long as I can.
As long as I can. There you go. All right. So no matter if you know you have some stuff going on, no matter if you do incident response already, if you have some storage and if you have some network choke point where you can just put the data on disk and put it somewhere, I can only recommend do that. At some day, you may be grateful for that, and if not, you just have some space wasted and you can still throw away the data. It doesn't hurt you. And no matter what you do, try to check your loggings, because that's one thing. even where we work, when you check what has been configured in the log settings of all the systems and you put all this stuff on a table and check the quality, you'll be amazed how many bad logging configurations we have. You have log lines which only have half the information you would need in terms of an incident. So for example, you have a proxy log saying, yes, someone visited this evil web page. And you ask, who? You don't have the information. You don't have the username in there. You don't have the source IP address in there. Or it's natted. So you always have 10.0.0.1 as the source address. And when you don't look at that, you will never figure out. And when you need it, it's too late. So that's why I only can recommend check your log files. Really, it's intensely important to do so, to just as an exercise, let's say if something happened, would we have all the information in the logs to recover that, to go after that, in combination with the traces, of course. And what we did talk about is the standard malware, which is loud, which is crappy, which uses weird domain names consisting of only strange letters. So this is the stuff you easily spot. You have kind of advanced malware, which maybe app uses ports, like pretending to be HTTP, HTTPS, pretending to be FTP. You have the targeted ones, which usually have pretty good communication protocol usage. So they hide inside HTTP, they hide inside HTTPS. They sometimes fully encrypt all that traffic, so you don't even have a chance to see what's going on. So you see a perfectly legit HTTPS call, and what's inside HTTPS, you have no idea. So if you fear of that, you should start thinking about and start talking with your colleagues in the company about some chance to break SSL, to give all those appliances which care about your security and all those logging mechanisms a chance to log, to monitor, to inspect stuff inside encrypted connections. Also very important. And then you have, of course, this very nasty stuff where it's okay, when it comes to money and someone puts like $3 million on a table and says, hey, I need to own this company. Give me a piece of malware which just fits, I want to steal all the data. Of course, when you put money on the table, things get nasty, right? So that you might end up finding some pretty customized kernel driver on some of your servers, which is perfectly signed with a stolen digital software certificate from whatever other company which they hacked before. All the external communication from your infected workstations does not go out to evil website 2, evil website 3, but to regular domains, to a hotel, to a restaurant, which they also hacked before. So whatever you check, everything looks kind of legit until you go down to the very last bit of information. Say, I know it's a restaurant webpage, I know the user is going there for dinner, but something is strange inside this request. There's some data I don't understand. And if I go visit the webpage, it looks different than this infected machine. So in the whole range, everything is possible. And the more advanced it gets, the more nasty it gets, and the less chances you have doing network forensics. And this is also something to remember. Network forensics is not always successful. That's also very bad. But at some point, you do what you can do, and you have to give up. So 2 last recommendations for like what you can in general do. For example, you check your DNS requests and see, okay, what answers do I get from the domain name servers where I get some IP address back starting with 127.0.0 something. Who has seen that? That you ask for some website and you get a 127.0.0 address back. Who has seen that? Is this valid? Is it legit? Is there some legit application which behaves like that? Any idea? Huh? Louder? Yeah, because it's standing there. Yeah, okay. No, giving back local host addresses is a good way just to check something. So you can use the DNS protocol to ask a server, hey, do you know something about a certain domain? And I don't mean the IPv4 address from some website, but this is typically used for spam checking, for example. So if I send a mail to our packetfoo.com email account, or you do that, your mail server might go to a spam checking system and send a DNS request with our packetfoo.com domain and ask, hey, is this domain packetfoo on some known spam sender list? So is this definitely something which is known to be bad, or can I talk to that? And DNS can say yes or no, right? So they give back, for example, 127.0.0.1 if it's good, and 127.0.0.3 55 if it's bad, or whatever, or 58 if it's another bad category. So it's just attributes and values. So having those 127 addresses coming back is pretty normal. The thing is, if you have that for spam checking, you find that out at one point. And there are other systems where you have no idea why those are giving back a 127 address. It's, let me see, I have it on another slide. Yeah. It's especially interesting when the answer is not always 127.0.0.1. Because sometimes there is a public IP, then it goes back to 127 and back to another public IP. Who has seen that behavior? What's that? Yeah.
Sometimes want you to access the server and sometimes not.
You all hear that? Control traffic from malware. Why would that be? What if I were the attacker and you have my malware installed on your machine? I want to talk to you. So when you ask for my command server, why should I give you back a local host IP address, a 127 address? Because obviously you can't talk to me using that address. Why would I do that? No, yeah, in theory, yeah, but this is way easier. No, this is a legitimate response. So I have a registered DNS server from my malicious domain, and I say whoever asks for my domain gets a 127 IP address. So my own malware can't talk to me. But there's the trick. I can decide when my malware can talk to me. So I just change my DNS record and say, now I'm reachable under this public IP address in Hawaii. So I sit there in Hawaii, and then all the malware I wrote can connect back to me on my Hawaiian IP address. I shut down my laptop, put it back on localhost, so they can't communicate to me. They don't do that. So I move to Sweden, fire it up, get a new IP address, change my DNS record, all the malware goes to Sweden. Pretty simple. The trick is, you want to have your malware being able to contact you, because you can't contact your malware, but the malware can open the browser, use the logout credentials from the user, go through the company proxy, perfectly legit, and visit some web page, my web page. I'm the attacker. And I know there's incident responders, I know there's security guys, I know there's the guys like you who have their lists of every DNS per week, and they check that, and they see, well, there's some client, and he's visiting evilwebsite.com every 5 minutes. Well, this is strange, I gotta check that, if I check the proxy logs. So when I don't want something from my malware, when I just leave it running, gathering data, dealing with malicious stuff, I put it on loopback, so there's no communication. So you don't see anything in the proxy log. So this is kind of silent, except for, of course, it's doing DNS. So in the DNS logs, you will spot it. You won't see it in the proxy logs until I want this thing to happen. So again, there might be something bad in there, and this is always something I can recommend, because DNS definitely is key if you're checking stuff. It's never wrong to go through all your domains. And you can do that using T-Shark with T-fields and the stuff I have here. You can, of course, also do the host statistics. One problem, the QZ hosts just keeps one IP address. So when he sees 127.0.0.1 for the first time, he remembers that one, and no matter what comes later, he will just have one line for that. So if you compare that, there's lots of stuff, and this information will be gone, because you just have for one individual IP just one line. So be careful. I would prefer doing that in T-Shark. Okay. So that was some crafted demos from malware we did using Metasploit or whatever. So, and there's this mass malware, which behaves different, which uses some of the techniques I've shown you, but in a more sophisticated way, not so easy to spot. And I thought maybe I'd bring in one or two exploit kits to show how they behave, and I found, hey, there's a guy who does that all the time. So I don't know if you know this website. Oh, I'm over the time, I see there. Sorry, I try to hurry up. But this is definitely a must visit if you like to play around there. Because this guy, who unfortunately couldn't make it to the S, and I think he's also not here, or stand up, no. There's lots and lots and lots of information on specific malware, top current, where you can always have a look at, okay, what is this thing doing? You get graphs, you get a how-to, How does it look in the browser? What's happening in Wireshark? How do you analyze that with all the background information you need? Also using Snort and Bro and whatever. So this is awesome, because this is lots of stuff to exercise, to practice, to train your eyes, to train, to deal with stuff, to recognize behaviors, to recognize anomalies. And I think, let me check, I think he also has an exercise session. There you go, traffic analysis exercises. And here's tutorials, and here's exercise. I can really just recommend that. This is awesomely done. He put lots of time and energy on that. You can also find him on Twitter. When he put up something new, he's posting about that. Awesome stuff, really good. So definitely worth putting it in your must-read list and following that. And I'm sure you've been to Eric's talk about man-on side attacks yesterday, most of you. I see some common faces. You want to tell it by yourself or do a quick wrap-up? Because Eric did an awesome network forensics lab when we were at the first conference in Berlin last year. And I found that his pretty big zip file using the virtual machines and all the stuff in the lab guide is still online. And I asked him if I'm allowed to do so, or to tell this. Yes, it is. So if you want to have an offline lab with lots of traces and a fully built scenario, like lab exercise, also something I can highly recommend, because this is well worth 1, 2, 3 days of training, and you'll definitely get some pretty good experience, way more than I could have told you here in 70 minutes. That's why. So definitely those 2 links, absolutely recommended. So if you're given the time, and most of you have earned their coffee, I think I'm over time. Yes, okay, sorry. So there's just 2, 3 more slides. You'll see them on the website afterwards, or if you're interested in more advanced techniques from current malware using Twitter to hide command and control traffic, which is kind of nasty because something tweets, and you know inside the tweets there's something which is nasty, but you don't spot it. Feel free to come to me, ask some questions, but for the rest of you, thanks for attending, enjoy the coffee, have a good day.